The topic for today is a really complex one, and that's kind of what we just finished off on at the break. And many people might actually think of how we feed ourselves sustainably and equitably as potentially a wicked problem. And wicked problems come out of design theory, and they are the idea that sometimes things are so complex we can't actually understand all the components of it. And that maybe even when we look at finding a solution for one aspect of a problem, it actually causes more problems. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to ask the panelists to each introduce themselves and just spend just a couple of minutes talking about where they are in a food system. There's obviously no single food system. And we'll start with that. Eddie, do you want to go first?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Guten Abend. And I, Edward Hill, Eddie, and I am currently just recently hired, so I'll put myself in place right now. I am urban planner, food systems planner, went to University of Washington, program there a few years ago, finished up, and I'm currently at Oregon State University in the Small Farms and Crops program as a program development person. I'm also working as Associate Director for the OSU Global Hemp Innovation Center. So both of those programs are launching BIPOC-focused Black and Indigenous people of color programs to put equity in front of the industry instead of behind again. So we're working to develop programs and pathways for training, education, to bolster up Black and Indigenous communities in Oregon and Washington regionally to create more farmers and to start getting into the value-added product chain and improving how food gets to the city.
Okay, so there's one person speaking about multiple areas, actually multiple food systems that they're currently functioning in. And I know each of these panelists, so I think you're going to be impressed with how different their roles actually are. So Julia, you want to go ahead?
Yes, my name is Julia Niiro. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Milk Run. So we are an online marketplace that allows people, so chefs and consumers, to purchase directly from local farmers. And kind of the challenge that we're solving with technology is distribution as well as market access. So for us, it's about how can small farmers really more efficiently and effectively deliver their goods to local communities. So whether that's urban environments with last mile delivery or their neighbors. So how can we also kind of fill in food deserts in between? My background is I used to work for a company where my job was really as a consultant for DuPont, Syngenta. So I came at things from kind of a bigger company lens. And I became a small farmer. So I also raise beef. And I also own a USDA meat processing facility, so one of the last remaining independent ones. A huge issue in the supply chain. And I guess kind of through that is how ultimately landed on my contribution to food systems, which was applying technology to create a more scalable model to build stronger, more resilient regional supply chains.
Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Beaubien, and for the last 15 years or so, I've been right in the middle of the supply chain, mostly as a processor, with visibility both upstream and downstream. In one role, I worked for a large coffee roaster that purchased coffee from coffee producers all over the world and sold it to many of the largest retailers in the US. And then in another role, I worked for a dairy cooperative which owned a brand and its processing facilities and produced a significant amount of the milk supply for the products that they made. In both roles, as the sustainability lead at both of those companies, I was in a position to work collaboratively, both upstream and downstream and internally, to try to come up with solutions to both procure products or source products and sell responsibly. And I like to think of myself as embracing the third way thinking. I don't know if that's a common term or not, but it's a synergy between old and new forms of agriculture. So it's not sustainable farming versus industrial farming. It's a both and. We need all of the solutions. We need to take the best from both. I like to think of it as kind of a happy paradox.
So we have a really limited time, and what I want to do is just kind of jump right in with some really pointed, specific, focused questions. And I'm going to go to Julia first because she is fighting in the world of launching a new business at this time. So Julia, if you could remove one major challenge in the food system that you work in right now, what would it be?
Lack of access to capital. I think, to see many small farmers right now who need a lot, to see so many processors who need a lot, to see so many small businesses and entrepreneurs who are working on huge challenges, who need support. When you think about, it's just, there isn't that right now. As a farmer, the infrastructure, we have a lot of work to do, right? Our infrastructure needs upgrading, new technology, new systems. Kind of, to me, all of it comes back to ultimately lack of access to any capital for kind of this new generation of farmers who's coming in, who may want to take over farms, who may want to take over processing facilities, who may want to take over these keys to the supply chain, or even want to develop technology that will help scale kind of some of these solutions that we so desperately need. They can't. And what they would be able to do, these entrepreneurs are kind of in rural America. They're boots on the ground people. They're building the systems that we need in the future, and they offer us so much, but they aren't going to Stanford. They aren't kind of meeting that venture capital pattern. They also, they don't maybe have the capital networks from, years in nonprofit work or academia. But they are, in my opinion, I have the rare privilege of being able to work with so many of them all of the time, and I guess I go to sleep every night just wondering how much better the world would be if even some of these entrepreneurs could receive $50,000 or $100,000 towards their efforts, or just to make their lives easier. But even that small kind of access to capital, it just doesn't exist. And I think we're doing all of these amazing entrepreneurs a huge disservice.
Eddie, I know you said you're new in your role, but is access to capital a challenge that you're seeing in the communities that you're trying to work with?
Yeah, the OSU role it's new, but the work, I've been farming, I was organic farming and started in Olympia, Washington in '94. So I've got I didn't come into OSU without a track record of monitoring this. And the way it's playing out in terms of demographics and groups, Black and indigenous populations are still have the most disparities and the largest gaps. There's been direct investment. If you look at Washington State University in the last 10 years, you look at Oregon State in the last 10 years, there's been a direct investment by extension colleges and business people, food companies and corporations in the bolster or the raising up of white women and the raising up of the Hispanic Latino community in Oregon with, language appropriate classes. You have, Latinx people who are teaching the classes. You have women that are running the classes for the women, going to, sheep shearing, and, it's a healing thing, right? So in the last 10 years, you have a 30% increase in white women, small farms owners, and white women owning small farm businesses, and you have a 20% increase in the Latinx or Hispanic community ownership and operation of small farms. So access to capital for those two populations, we know it's a challenge. Just like if the government gives you $1, it's not a real dollar. It's 82 cents. If they give me $1, it's 63 cents. So what they should be doing, that lack of access to capital, is because they're not equating or valuing the inequity we have to face. So they should be handing you, when the government gives you $1 or a foundation gives you $1, they should be handing you $1.32. They should be handing a Black woman or indigenous woman $1.74 because of the disparity. The economic cost of getting us on the right track is giving everybody an actual dollar. So there's always going to be a capital issue because the market says that, that land has to be this, or that, always changing the game on us. So I find it's a challenge, and I also find it's a challenge in an environment where cooperative models, working together, the idea about culture and like the quadruple bottom line. Now it's, for those of, who's heard of the quadruple bottom line now? There was triple bottom line, now there's quadruple. So they added spirit and culture. So now you have to, you can assess companies by how they have a spirit or culture, which is what we were doing 10,000 years ago. So as we come back to the future or the past, somebody mentioned it earlier about merging, yeah, you said it. So that, for us, that's Afro-ecology. That's bringing our ancient African and indigenous stories and techniques, like rice paddies, that we were already tearing, not we, I'm not Asian, but folks were doing it. And then you take those techniques and they come back as permaculture, and it's like, yo, like that's some old Celtic stuff. So I think the monetary valuation of those things are a challenge, and coming at farming like that is a challenge with your heart. But if you come with a transaction or a direct return, then those are the folks that get the money, because that culture of non-equitable equity is in place, that institutional bias against women or people of color or indigenous people to own land.
So obviously this is something that is also a factor in your work and something you're passionate about, and I want to make sure to not miss you in asking in a few words, what is the kind of number one thing that you would change right now in your work?
Number one thing I would change in the work? Oh, like in terms of how the work plays out?
If you could remove one major obstacle.
Land sovereignty, so land ownership. An appropriate transfer of land equivalent to the amount of land they handed over to the 1890 and 1863 colleges during the Morrill Act. So if hand over 10,000 acres to anybody, and they're probably going to do well, which they did. So, free land, free benefit, then you're kind of ahead. So I'm not saying free land, I'm saying there's empty land, so start putting people who want to use that land and give them ownership or holdings on it, so that they, land sovereignty I would remove the barriers to people understanding that that's a thing.
Thank you. And Sarah, you've worked in different systems, but ultimately with similar end goals in terms of sustainability and equity. So thinking a little bit about what Julia said and what Eddie has shared, in the work that you've done, what did you see as probably the biggest obstacle that you would advocate for removing?
The biggest challenge I think about is a bit of a compound problem. It is the relationship between food waste and food security. So I'm going to cheat a little bit on some statistics and quotes, because I think some other people have said it better than me. WWF, World Wildlife Fund's Pete Pearson said, "There's no single technology or policy intervention that can nip food waste in the bud. The problem occurs upstream and downstream in fields, warehouses, packaging, distribution, supermarkets, restaurants, and homes." I don't know if you know this, but in America, we throw 50 million tons of food into the landfill each year. American consumers waste 40% of the food that they buy. So if we took a third of that 50 million pounds and we got it into the hands of the people that are hungry, then we have solved for two issues. If you saw the last session, there's some pretty staggering statistics about the emissions that food waste in the landfill puts out, and if we could reduce those emissions, those greenhouse gas emissions, and also solve for food insecurity, then we've solved for two problems. In Oregon, we have number of food insecure kids is 18.9%. And on the north coast of Oregon, which is where I've been working most recently, that's as high as 20.5%. And we have food insecure kids that don't qualify for federal assistance. In Oregon, that is 37% of the population. And then kids that are eligible for free and reduced lunch is 52%. So 52% of our kids are struggling with where they're going to get their food each day. So despite the foodie culture that we have in Oregon and that we're so proud of, we have some pretty dramatic issues of food insecurity.
Okay, so we are definitely poking at this wicked problem in terms of how do we feed people, how do we give them not just calories but nutrition, and how do we do it in a way that is economical for everybody in the supply chain. And I want to go back to something that Julia mentioned when she started, and she made references to wanting to work with small farmers. I'm a geographer. All my degrees are in geography. So I always question this issue of scale, because a lot of it depends on where you're standing. The land that we have here in the Willamette Valley is super, super productive. You cross over into the more arid lands, and it takes more land to produce more calories. I'm wondering if each of you, in the context of your work and what you've been working on, would think a little bit about scale and just share any thoughts that you might have in terms of how might different scales of production actually contribute to the solution. I think we tend to gravitate to saying large farms are bad, but is there a place for those? What sort of is the role? What comes to mind for you when you think about how might different scales help be a solution? Julia, why don't you jump in first, because you've worked in some of the larger scale productions too. Sarah.
I think my answer is pretty simple. I think we need to stop thinking about it as binary, that big farms are bad and small farms are good. Bad farms are bad. So I think we need all farms from simple to complex in order to feed what we're expecting to be 10 billion people in 2050. And our policies need to benefit farm diversity also. We don't need policies that benefit large farmers and put small farmers at risk, or vice versa. Policies that support small farmers and put large farms at risk. So that's my perspective. I'm sure that the two of you have a lot more information about the ag in the middle and some of the smallhold farmers.
Julia.
It's a big topic. I think, there's a lot of issues. So as far as things that we can do, we have our subsidy issues and a small percentage of farms that receive those, when the intention of those is obviously to help and stabilize our supply and be able to keep food affordable. But that's working against us kind of at the moment. So I think we have a lot of these policies that were right for a time that have really, they're not right anymore, that we need to reverse quickly. We're certainly out of time. When we think about the fact that right now 90% of our farms, which are small family farms, are literally at risk for two big reasons. One is obviously their inability to make a living. The second is we have an aging farmer population. So we have 85% of our farmers right now are over 65. That is not only applicable to small farms, that is across the board. And then we have a world that we are now going to have to feed. So there's a lot as far as thinking about, is that going to be possible? So just the fact that, yes, we need more people farming, and then we need more diversification in our actual farms, right? We have kind of our soil issue that's happening right now. So kind of the regenerative movement, or all these smaller movements that are happening, which, again, to your point, which was much of that is just kind of reintegrating the way that systems always did work, which is personally what I'm kind of a huge fan of, right? This is our current industrial supply chain and our food system that is kind of based on this global pricing, right? The commodity market, which I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of build a different model. There doesn't have to just be this one kind of futures exchange. We have 5 main crops that we sell, and that's the only stable market that anybody can know. And if China decides to stop buying our meat, then all of a sudden the market tanks, even if you're just a small farmer who's selling to restaurants, right? We have a lot of opportunity to solve some of these larger systemic issues. And I think I'm getting a little off base right now, but the point of all of this is that so many of these answers are kind of the way that we used to work, right? So when we think about scale, yes, there is this, I think, especially in the business world, a lot of people are like, oh, small farmers, you want everybody to be like a hippie and backyard farm again, and that is absolutely not the case. I think it's about this ag of the middle, right? Which I think offers us a ton of answers. This is how communities used to feed themselves. It's going back to that concept of, could you find everything that you needed to feed your community in a 50-mile radius? And yes, there are farms that, there used to be 1,200 meat processing facilities in the state of Oregon, and they were in every town, in every community, because there were that many people, raising meat. And then yes, you had larger producers who could sell that meat at a more of a commodity level price. And they were working on food access, right? So I remember one day someone said to me when I was very early in kind of building the business, can you work on food access and profits for farmers at the same time? No, I cannot. But there are people who can work very effectively on both ends of the supply chain. But we cannot ignore, it's a whole system and an entire ecosystem. We've done a great job at thinking how to scale farms to keep food very cheap. And I will go out on a limb and say food is far too cheap. What we did not do very well is think about how to distribute that food. And then we didn't think at all about how to keep small farms small or kind of middle size and diversified so we could offset that. So yes, there's absolutely a place for both, but right now we've ignored 90%, and that's an issue.
I can see from the other panelists' head nodding that you just spoke very eloquently about some pretty critical topics. Eddie, do you want to add anything that Julia said?
I like what you were saying earlier, Sarah, about, take it out of the binary. Just fifth dimensional thinking, right? So since we're doing it as humans, apply it to Earth, apply it to everything else. Take the binary out of it. So you can do both and. You can do 5 things at once. And in fact, at this point in history, we have to do 5 things at once. You both have to put equity at the front so you don't screw people over anymore like we just did, right? CSAs were started by African Americans, farm cooperatives, Swedish, Scandinavian co-op models. These are systems that, again, we have, and we're beaten out of us, certain people of us, about the idea about bigger's better or plastic or, all this kind of stuff and single use, and you'll love it. So now that we're starting to dial back from that and starting to feel the repercussions of that mishandled Western thinking and that ideology, and we've absorbed it, we have to decolonize ourselves. And part of that decolonization is extracting the idea that farmers can't work together, that we can't function as a cooperative, and there are functioning. Tillamook's a cooperative. There's some major corporations that are cooperatives, and they're thriving because they are integrated. They are pooling dollars. They are, the New Horizons Milk, or, there's Mondragon in Spain, the Evergreen Cooperative in Cleveland. We have these new market, and it's coming. It's coming into play as climate stressors are hitting us. People are like, oh, damn, we really are going to be starving. Or, wow, there really are going to be 10 million people. Or, hey, it may be me. New Orleans may never be able to be, go back to. New York just finished their 10-year plan to start shutting down the tubes in Manhattan because they're figuring by 2030 there won't be a subway. So they're planning for these things. The government's planning for it. So it's up to us to see that we have to combine forces. Urban agriculture has 15, we have a scale. We have all these green spaces out to the forest. So if we start to think as a system, ecologically, we want to do yoga and think like everything's connected, then the food system is connected. Apply that. At each stage of the food system, you have small gardens in communities that not only provide some subsistence farming for food, not just for poor people and immigrants or refugees, but white folks and old ladies and veterans do it. Everybody does it. And the next scale, what you have to do is invest money in getting people out of the garden and into the farm, because there's Somali Bantus in this state who will run circles around a lot of farmers in this state because they got it down, but they don't know how to farm in the Northwest, or they have degrees in agroecology from Namibia, but they're not respected here. They got to drive taxis. So we have a workforce that's ready to get on land with all this land that 80-year-old cats are getting ready, don't know what to do with. And I'm like, we have the solutions right here for us. But we don't want to face them, because in order to face them, we have to decolonize the industrial food system. We have to bring and elevate women and Africans and immigrants and the Hmong and the Laotians and the Cambodians and the African Americans and pay back the losses and deal with this dirty, messy stuff that a lot of people are gonna, maybe we could just do a B Corp, and it's like, no, that's not gonna make it equitable. That doesn't, just because you have you're using, how about beyond B Corp? Beyond organic. Like, I don't need an organic certificate. I've never used, my land is organic. And I'm not arguing against those certifications, but I'm saying we're gonna certify ourselves to death. And we're gonna check our own balances out of our opportunity right now in this region to solve our own problem and do it in a way that brings all of those scales, suburban, para-urban, urban, and rural, all need to be connected. Trees, bamboo, hemp, marijuana, milk, cheese, goat, wool, fiber, processing. We have an opportunity, and we only have 4 million people in the state. And in a few years, there's gonna be 8 million. And in 50 years, it's gonna be whatever. We'll figure it out. You've seen the movie. So,
Thank you. So there's a lot coming out up here, right? So I'm going to just shift gears just a little bit and also pull out something else that Julia mentioned. And one of the things in the agriculture sector that is being thrown at us a lot is technology. And the idea that technology is going to save us, or it is going to create the disparity, and it's going to take the disparity and accentuate it even more rapidly. Forbes had an article fairly recently about the #1 disruptor that you've probably never heard of, which is indigo, which is heavily into the agriculture sector. So there's a lot coming. Silicon Valley obviously has shifted and has got a lot of agriculture development going on. Sensors that are going into everything from harvesting trays to harvesting equipment. Drones being brought into all kinds of agriculture systems. Julia, I know that technology is a major component of what you do, and you actually see it as part of a solution. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit? Like kind of how you see technology as serving the growers that you work with?
I mean, I think, that technology is inevitable. I think we also have like an issue with the fact that even just catching up to, for example, rural broadband access, don't even get me started. I live 35 miles outside of Portland, Oregon, and I don't have access to internet, and I've somehow built a tech company, just saying that for a moment. But anyway, no, my point being, I think and it's a bit of the world I came from. So then when I started working with a lot of small farms and, realized, well, there's a lot to talk about in the topic of technology, but just starting to realize how far some of our systems are behind, that's scary. We cannot afford to leave people behind. So defining technology in this way of saying, yes, just literally getting people off fax machines, getting people off equipment that has been, from the 1920s that's breaking down when there are way more efficient ways, so then you have all of that, which to me, that's a straight access to capital issue. That is state funding. That is the responsibility of government, and that needs to be addressed right now, absolutely. And then you have the question of what is technology going to do for us in the future? And the food tech space is coming fast. There is there is a huge school of thought that says farming is obsolete. There needs to be no farmers, and all of our food can be created in labs. I personally don't want to live in that kind of world at all. So I think, if we can take people who understand and love this ecosystem and believe in its power to offer us a planet and a community that's worth living in into the future that we want to hand down, to me, those are farmers. That's people who love food. And to take technology and better enable our ability to steward our land, that's worth doing. And so when we think about being able to help, farmers more effectively rotate their cattle quickly and measure the carbon sequestration, these are amazing things that we can apply and we can do when we think about using technology to measure how much should it cost to distribute food, and can we set up small aggregation facilities to better facilitate joint collection and delivery better? How can we use technology to make the systems we have in place today work better? as opposed to how can we take this kind of Silicon Valley concept that the solution we need doesn't exist and we need to hire a team of engineers to build it. That's reckless. But I think it's important for food systems, I don't know, anybody who's passionate about it, food systems entrepreneurs, people who are working in the space on whatever spectrum, to take responsibility for the fact that that's coming. And so do we want to be in that? Do we want to, I mean, we can't kind of say that that's resisted, it's here. So I think it's important that we give the reins of technology to the people whose lives it affects and care about kind of who it will impact, so that we don't live in a world where we don't have farmers. I'm gonna
build off that and direct an equity question towards Eddie a little bit related to this. So a lot of the, for those of us who work close to the agriculture sector, even if you watch the media casually, we have a severe labor shortage in farming. Severe, just in terms of not enough people to get the crops harvested. And a lot of the technology that's being developed is to offset that, is to be able to machine harvest rather than having people harvest. But ironically, that creates another labor shortage, because if you're a young, smart tech kid coming through school, you tend not to end up in agriculture. You go work for a software engineer. You go work for somebody else. So Eddie, with the population that you're talking about and this idea of access to land, what about the technology barrier? Is that something that you see organizations addressing and helping people get up to speed to be able to utilize this technology?
Yeah, I think in some ways you do. Like it's choose the demographic population and the zip code, and as it gets worse, you have less access to the tools to like get into private school or knowing what an ag school is. So on that scale, there are places in the country where people are making it work. Like technology is one of the new Emmanuel Pratt from Chicago with Sweetwater Aquaponics. He just got the MacArthur Genius Award. We used to work together at Will Allen's Growing Power before it went defunct back in 2010, and with the year Will got the MacArthur Genius. And the integration of technology, STEM, like people are doing that. Like Alabama A&T, agriculture and technology. We already did STEAM. Like we've been doing it. This is not new, but it's packaged, right? So that training and the lack of understanding, sort of the institutional approach is like make a computer to solve the problem, right? So we thought by getting laptops or having PCs, it would make our life easier. We'd type less, we'd be less. Now we sit in front of them all day long, 24/7 damn near, right? So it's how technology is brought into agriculture and how you promote people, because the machines need to be fixed, mechatronics, the Northwest food producers, manufacturers, the new tech. Now, new tech is awesome. And we need people to do both things. It has to be both ancient, which means organic and natural, and no chemicals, and it also has to have a machine to help with harvesting, because the reality is that two people will have to shift to other things like robot fixing or working on synthetics or there's other jobs other than just farming. Now there's hemp. So now there's hemp processing. Now there's fiber and pulp. Now there's manufacturing of products. So there's other things in the chain. I think if we stop looking at food supplies just as the food itself. Same thing with access, like access to healthy foods. Okay, well, how about access to land to grow a healthy food business? Instead. So I don't want to be given any more handouts from Oregon Food Bank to my community. I want Oregon Food Bank to buy me 100 acres of land so we can all start growing food and goats and have a halal goat processing place in the north, so we can serve the market. So we stop shipping halal goat from New Zealand or Australia, which would reduce vehicle miles traveled by bazillions of carbon pounds, right? So, again, I see some people doing it. I think that people of color can't run as fast as white money. And white people can't run as fast as their own money. Yeah, we got the Ritz-Carlton going in downtown. Do we need a Ritz-Carlton in Portland? Yeah, I'm like, yo, what? That's not Portland. That's not keeping it weird. That's keeping it Wall Street. So the same thing with our farms. We have to protect, just like we didn't protect Northeast Portland or Central District Seattle from gentrification. We got to not let people gentrify our farmlands, or we're all going to starve. And we have to become friends and start working together and create a cold chain with Daimler that has electric vehicles and start using, like we did with bike lanes and transit. Like Portland's awesome. We wrote bike lanes. Yeah, let's fix the food system and then we'll really be famous.
So I've just been given the 5 minutes. So Sarah, you have a choice. You can either continue on the technology theme, or you can steer the group to my last question, which is if you could tell an eater one thing, what would it be? What would you want them to know?
I could kind of answer both. The technology question, I mean, we could stay here all weekend and talk about technology. And I really appreciate the perspectives of my fellow panelists. One of the areas that I think is fascinating is how technology is being used to measure soil. And I think one of the things that we're not talking enough about, and I think is the key to the future of food, is soil. It's one of the best things we can do for the future of our food supply. And we have science looking into what's happening below the ground now. When we think about loss of biodiversity, we think about the spotted frogs and creatures in the Amazon, which are all very important, but 90% of all organisms on the 7 continents live underground, and we are not taking care of the soil. So I think that's the message I would want to leave everyone with, is think about the soil.
Julia, 3 words or less. What do you want people to know what do you want an eater to know about the food system?
I'll just, that no farms, no food.
There you go. Eddie?
Be more conscious.
Just be more conscious. Conscious eaters is what we're striving for. Thanks so much to our panelists. They've just opened up a lot for us to think about further as we eat this evening. And thanks all to everybody who was able to join us today.